Dan Perry has spent his entire career in exactly that profession, and I'm delighted with his enthusiasm for the task that I have certainly set myself as a lifelong goal. So we'll hear from Dan now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aubrey, for that kind introduction. But I have a bone to pick with you. You've placed me at the end of this long, distinguished panel of outstanding speakers, and then you have me immediately follow Barney Siegel and his stories about child abuse and the UFO pulse. And I'm the last thing standing between you and dinner. So this is a tough position, but I guarantee you I'll make up for it by making mine probably the shortest talk that you hear tonight. So, a few points. Not long ago, the editors of the journal Science put out a very special issue. They wanted to commemorate 125 years of that particular journal, that magazine, being in publication. And so the editors polled themselves and they listed 125 really big questions that we do not yet have the answer to, but which are now reachable by today's scientists. You know, a normal issue of Science magazine, for those of you that subscribe or see it occasionally, is that they're reporting on very small things that scientists are learning about how the world works. And in the case of this special commemorative 125th year issue, they wanted to put out the 125 things that we don't know, but, and this was the important caveat, we will know or will be very close to knowing within the next 25 years. And because 125 is still a big number, and they were conscious of readers' attention span, they published all 125, but they took an elite 25 questions, the really biggest, the ones that will be most powerful, and they listed those as well. And these are questions like, what is the universe made of? And can the laws of physics be unified? And what will we find to run the world in place of cheap oil? And when will we find it? Big questions. And very high up on that list of 25, actually, big question number 6, that the editors of Science magazine believe we will learn, or be very close to learning in the next 25 years, was the following. How much can human lifespan be extended? Well, the answer to that question, as you have well heard tonight, and which I know is on your minds in any case, the answers to that question will be utterly profound. For the past 2 decades, as Aubrey said, I've headed the Alliance for Aging Research in Washington. We're a not-for-profit organization. We do engage in very spirited advocacy in the nation's capital. We do it well within both the spirit and the letter of the law regarding the tax code. We've been called on numerous occasions to testify on Capitol Hill before House and Senate committees. We maintain close ties to the executive branch and the science agencies and to many Capitol Hill offices. We keep busy feeding information to the authorizing, appropriating, and budget committees about the value of medical research into diseases that mostly manifest themselves after middle age. But I have to tell you, I'm constantly dogged by the question that comes from so many people, what do we mean about aging research? And I will tell you what I tell them. First of all, I assure you that the Alliance for Aging Research is not an advocacy group for research that's getting really old and out of date. And when I explain to them that we are advocates for science with the potential to improve and add years of health and vitality for millions, there's still another set of questions. Well, are we talking about research into specific diseases of aging, cancer, cardiovascular disease, and so on? Are we talking about getting the nation's health professional workforce ready to meet the coming silver tsunami of chronic age-related diseases? Or are we talking about general well-being and nutrition, psychological adjustment and wellness for people in later life? Well, in some sense, the answer is all of the above. But what I want to focus on in the time that remains is the question that for many of us now seems to be the most intriguing of all. The one question with the greatest potential to change everything we think we know about aging and longevity. And that question is, what can our very best scientists learn about fundamental biological mechanisms that we call the aging process, or aging processes, as some would argue? And what are the chances that we will bend that knowledge to our own benefit and be able to modify during our own lifetimes to benefit our species by moderating that process, that underlying process? Now, this is the dominion that we call biogerontology. And success in this realm would be the most consequential and indeed the most disruptive technology that we can imagine. Because success could redefine the length and quality of human life beyond anything we've known. And the greatest value of all that might come from biogerontology is that it might provide us with a strategy for preventing, postponing, or even eliminating many current diseases of aging. Scientists have shown in many, many experiments that aging can be slowed, put on hold, even in some cases reversed in laboratory animals. And here's the best part. Those interventions in aging with test animals act as a powerful means to put off, prevent, or at least postpone a large number of health catastrophes that can accompany aging. Everything from organ failure to cognition to blindness to cancer. Many of you read about caloric restriction. There's also hormonal manipulation. There's also genetic interventions, not appropriate for humans, but in test animals. And that's the way age delay works. It works by putting all of those diseases much, much later in life and much closer to death, the compression of morbidity that Dr. Stock mentioned. Yet, ironically, for all of the potential good that could come from biogerontology, here's the bad news. It's been examined and analyzed less than most any other field of medicine by policymakers and by the media. It's received less support from government, from industry, or private philanthropy. And even if we are to be successful, modifications in aging could so challenge fundamental beliefs of people so as to incite irrational fears and resistance from the very people it would help. A couple of years ago, Dr. Huber Warner, who spent 21 years heading the smallish biology of aging program at the National Institute on Aging, went back to academia, and he wrote, looking back on his career, he said the following thing. Compared to other biomedical disciplines, research on biogerontology has been poorly regarded, underfunded during most of the last half of the 20th century. Well, that's true enough of the last half of the 20th century. But now consider this statement from a forthcoming paper will be published in the next few weeks by the British Medical Journal, and it's authored by a dozen leading American and British scientists, including 2 former directors of the National Institute on Aging. And here's a statement from that article. There is now a reason to believe that a new paradigm of health promotion and disease prevention for the 21st century is plausible and should include as its central theme a concerted effort to slow aging in people. Such an effort, if successful, would serve as a new broad-spectrum strategy for primary prevention that would significantly enhance and accelerate improvements in health at all ages. That's what's coming out from very highly regarded, highly credentialed and mainstream scientists on 2 continents. That's pretty expansive and pretty forward-thinking. So what can each of us do to advance a new paradigm for health promotion and disease prevention in the 21st century that makes as its central tenet to slow aging? Well, recently, the board of directors of my own organization, which includes Bill Hazeltine, they committed to an aggressive effort to speak up for longevity science, which I think is a more elegant way to say biogerontology, in order to hasten the social benefits of extending years of healthy aging, a goal that we refer to as pursuing the longevity dividend. Now, the members of my board are not naive. They know very well that longevity science continues to be a tough sell. Let's face it, call it by any name, the quest for significantly extended lifespan has an image problem, as Dr. Stock mentioned. Because for well over the past millennium of human history, we've heard plenty about searches after the philosopher's stone, or the fountain of youth, or the elixir of life. And people know that such quests have been notoriously unsuccessful in the past. And by now, those perceptions of those quixotic journeys are so deeply ingrained in our cultural consciousness. But then again, the medieval alchemists and Ponce de Leon and Alex Carroll didn't have the tools of nanotechnology or the knowledge of the insulin signaling pathway to guide them. They didn't have proteomics or the human genome to work on. And in the 21st century, we either do have or soon will have a much stronger grasp on all of those technologies. Ultimately, success against the pathologies of aging will come from applications of really, truly big science. This will be a combination of biological insights, incredibly high-speed information systems, statistical modeling, and systems engineering. And here in California, we keep coming back to this, also in the United Kingdom, in Singapore, Japan, Israel, and a few other places, these technologies are already being put to use to unlock the potential of regenerative medicine. And indeed, regenerative medicine, stem cell research, and related technologies might very well be the critical enabling platform and an early stage for longevity science. Now, large sums from private philanthropy certainly have an opportunity to lead the way, especially in the early stages, to overcome the disbelief and the inertia that's at the national governmental level. But ultimately, big science on this scale will require the resources, and the leadership, the commitment of national policymakers. But I must tell you, tonight, we're not there. And why? Well, most politicians are not biologists. They're not biotech entrepreneurs. Most of them are lawyers, Bernie. And unlike Bernie Siegel, they are rather insecure when it comes to talking about science and medical matters. Now, sure, they will launch a war on cancer or a war on AIDS, but they'll only do that when their insecurities are first overcome by being embraced by established medical figures. They're not going to stick their necks out into something that doesn't already have luminaries from Harvard and MIT already paving the way for them. And unfortunately, most of these established medical research authorities have made their careers pursuing medical goals, not globally aimed at aging, but one disease at a time. That's how we award Nobel Prizes, is for following a pathway of a particular protein down to what it actually does, and then you get a prize. Going after aging, the whole complexity of that, is not the way most of the authorities, medical authorities, earn their stripes. Also, most established scientific leaders have been brought up to believe that aging is not only unchangeable, but not even very interesting. Now let's move to the lay people. Most of them don't believe that there's anything that you can do about aging, quite frankly. Not in this room, perhaps, but Go out to West Covina and ask people if you think there's anything you can do about aging. And even if you could, they believe it would be a social and an economic catastrophe. You know, too many sick old people sitting around not pulling their weight. And even if people believe there could be some scientific breakthrough that would make it possible to extend the healthy years of life, many will set themselves up in opposition because it sounds unnatural or upsetting to social norms or religious beliefs. Again, this has been touched upon by others. But then there are those who think that there is something that you can do about aging, and in fact it's already possible because of what you order online by way of various nutrients or nutritional supplements, or what you buy at the GNC stores. So they say, who needs further research? I'm already extending my life because of the supplements I take. So what will it take to overcome negative assumptions among the public? And what will it take to convince cautious public officials to set up the kind of major scientific effort to crack the biology of aging, as Greg Stock suggested we should all be beginning to push? First, political leaders especially need to know what is already coming our way in an aging population that has nothing to do with biogerontology. Last year, U.S. health expenditures were $2.3 trillion. There'll be $3 trillion before even the oldest baby boomer turns 65 and joins Medicare in less than 3 years. 3/4 of this national health bill goes to treat chronic diseases, most of which are driven by the underlying processes of aging: cardiovascular disease and stroke, type 2 diabetes, neurodegenerative diseases, cancer, loss of vision and hearing, the list goes on and on. But just 4 diseases alone that I mentioned already cost or account for nearly $1 trillion in health expenditures in the United States each year. By 2030, Alzheimer's disease alone will cost $1 trillion a year, and that's the equivalent of the entire Medicare budget, Medicaid, veterans benefits, and every other federal health program, going for one disease by 2030. So if you want to get the attention of national policy makers, members of Congress, you want to remind them of this rolling horror show of chronic diseases, disability, lost human potential, and the almost unimaginable costs to budgets at the federal, state, county, and family level. Next, we need to drive home the message from biogerontology and bring the authorities together to make it stick. And that is that some control over the processes of human aging may be, and in fact, may be the only way to blunt the impact of the multiple diseases of aging that we call the silver tsunami that's headed our way. Compelling scientific evidence that it is indeed plausible and possible to delay, postpone, or modify diseases of aging in our species, that point has to be made and beyond doubt or dispute. To prove our case, we're going to need some credible and statistically validated measures. In drug development, these are called biomarkers. Measures that show that an intervention or a cocktail of interventions is actually retarding a whole host of variables that track with slowing the aging process in humans. Today, the FDA does not recognize that there is anything that will change these variables of aging. And until there is some level of scientific consensus enough to convince the FDA that a drug that comes into the pipeline will get an approval because it is retarding a multiple number of measures of aging, until that happens, this will be an underfunded area in terms of industrial investment. But imagine what would happen if there was some level of recognition that if you hit these 15 different data points in a clinical trial, you get a label that says you're an age-retarding medication. It may be that the first one that comes through that pipeline will be aimed at a specific disease, like diabetes or like metabolic syndrome. But it is working because it is affecting that underlying biological mechanisms of aging. And after a few years, there are more scientific papers saying, gee, the people that are on this diabetes medicine, they're not getting the number of heart attacks, the number of strokes, they don't have cataracts. Pretty soon there's off-label prescribing of this drug. That may be another way in which the first anti-aging therapies make it. It also might be a huge psychological breakthrough if an animal study, such as the Methuselah Mouse Prize, shows that instead of dying at 3.5 or 4 years, the same species of mouse, somebody has engineered it to live 6, 7, 8 years. There are a number of ways that we might be able to make that kind of a breakthrough. One thing that I know we can do right now to try to prepare policymakers and indeed the entire public to accept, anticipate, and yearn for an advance in hitting the underlying processes of aging and thus extending healthy years of life is to explode the myth that success in longevity science is going to mean more sick, old people and a drag on the economy. We're looking for ways to fund a series of high-level papers from the nation's and the world's most prominent health economists to show that all things considered, extending the healthy years of life, even with higher costs in some areas, will be a savings to our economy, a boost to our economy that is beyond anything that one might imagine. That's something that we can do, and we're hoping to do it very soon. Finally, policymakers need to see that we are already spending tens of billions of dollars every year at the National Institutes on Aging on a limited and a possibly flawed strategy of going after one disease at a time. Because in old age, there's so much comorbidity, even if you are able to nail stroke or even some cancers, there is so much comorbidity that you never get out of the box. In fact, trying to fund medical research into diseases of aging one at a time is a little bit like carrying water in a paper bag that is leaking from many different slits. The longevity science answer is to preserve the overall integrity of the paper bag despite time and wear and tear. And in the aging analogy, the key to that stronger bag is understanding the underlying mechanisms of aging and pursuing that knowledge to its ultimate goal, which would be a broad and beneficial longevity dividend for our entire society. Thank you all very much.